Good Sunday evening, everybody. It is June 25th, and I am on the road, actually heading the opposite direction than what I had intended, as I am having some vehicular difficulty. And so I am having to turn around and head back the way that I came. Anyway, this is Western Healthcare Exposed, and tonight is going to be story time. I have been trying to come up with the best way to do this, and I am just going to relate my entire experience that I had with COVID. I just want to let y'all know what that was. And so anyway, here we go. So when all this started, I was working at about 3 different facilities. Now, I will not mention the names or any of the people involved in any of these other places I work due to potential repercussions. But anyway, so I was working at 3 different places. One of them was a hospital, and I was doing critical care. And so COVID hit, and I remember when it finally got into the United States, I was at a daddy-daughter dance with my 2 girls and some buddies and their daughters. And I remember my wife calling and saying, it's here. And we had already kind of been hearing about it. And so anyway, we got done at the dance and we all went out for ice cream. And me and the dad sat there and came up with a plan in case this was a really bad scenario. And we put in some orders for some stored food and some medical supplies before everybody else got it. And so all that came in, and we were set as far as a community to help each other out and potentially take care of each other if something like that did happen. At work, things were no different initially, and then as the cases started ticking up, we came into work one day and everybody had a mask on. And I was like, what's going on here? And they're like, oh, we have to wear masks now because of COVID. I'm like, okay. And that seemed reasonable because we didn't really know what this was, what was going to happen or anything. But they weren't making us wear N95 masks. We were wearing surgical masks. And anybody that can think through something reasonably well knows that viruses are way smaller than the mask can filter out. So the viruses can easily pass through the surgical mask. Now, one of the arguments that I had multiple times with people was, why, if they don't work, why do surgeons wear these masks in surgery? So this just basically shows that these people that's asking this don't know. And they were asking it to be derogatory, not because, hey, I don't know the answer to this, can you help me out? They were saying it like, oh, well, if the surgeons wear those masks, then why don't they wear that? And that kind of thing. So the masks are meant to prevent basically spit, whatever, hair falling off of a beard or something like that into a patient's wound. It has nothing to do with filtering out bacteria or viruses in surgery, nothing. And so we started wearing these surgical masks, and there were a few of us that were questioning, why are we doing this? It really don't make sense. If we're going to wear a mask, we should wear N95 masks. Well, it wasn't long, the N95 mask came, and then the PAPRs, which are basically battery-operated respirators, came. And so we had to wear those, and we had to gown up and glove up, and at one point I think we were even putting shoe covers on, and crazy stuff like that. And I don't guess it was really crazy initially, because the first 3, 4, or 5 weeks, we really didn't know what this thing was going to do. We didn't know how contagious it was. But anyway, it didn't take that long to figure out that what we were doing was just kind of ridiculous, and that we really didn't need to take any more precautions than what standard precautions were. But nobody would listen. And so during all this is when we all started walking opposite directions in grocery stores, and we had to stand 6 feet apart. And again, that's something that if you actually looked into it, when you cough or sneeze, aerosolized particles go way further than 6 feet. So that made no sense scientifically. And there was actually an article that came out way into COVID that debunked the 6 foot thing. But nobody listened, nobody read it, everybody just kept standing 6 feet apart. And and around that same time was when they started making people sit in their cars at the doctor's office, and they would page you or text you to come in, and you would get in, and you would be the only person in the waiting room. And churches were closing down, and gyms were closing down, and all this just nonsense was going on way into COVID, even after we kind of knew what was going on. Well, at work, we were basically treating people best we could, and we were all looking into potential therapies. And there was some studies and all coming out around I don't know how long into COVID, but anyway, there was some studies coming out that hydroxychloroquine might work, ivermectin might work, and melatonin might work, and all this stuff. So we started using hydroxychloroquine. The whole hospital was actually using it. Well, I came into work one day, and as I walked in, all the daytime docs were coming out of a meeting, and they said, "We can't use hydroxychloroquine anymore." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" The hospital won't let us use it. And so I started asking around what the deal was. Well, nobody could tell me. They just like, you can't use it. It's not FDA approved for COVID. And I'm like, well, when has that ever mattered, ever? Because it hasn't. And they couldn't tell me. Well, hydroxychloroquine was the first drug that I know of ever that could not be used off-label. And it was just with COVID. And so that was just, I guess, the first big thing that really hit me. I was like, what is going on here? There's something nefarious going on. And I don't know what it is at this point. So we kept on trying to treat people best we could. And sometime around that time, I don't know exactly on this timeline, but remdesivir came out. And we were being pushed to use remdesivir. And we were basically telling patients, hey, if you have COVID, stay at home as long as you can. If you come to the ER and you don't need to be on a ventilator, we're going to send you home. So when in the history of medicine have we sent somebody that is sick home and told to come back when they're so bad off they had to be on a ventilator? Never. I mean, I cannot believe we were actually doing that. I mean, I say we, meaning healthcare providers in general, not me, but because I would try to treat people, but we were not allowed to, as I'll get to here in a minute. But we were telling people to go home, and when you get so bad, come back, we'll get you on a ventilator, get you some remdesivir, and watch you die. And I mean, the whole Hippocratic Oath, the whole reason that people go into medicine was just thrown out the window. And we were not treating people. I mean, I have never seen anything like it. I mean, they would come into the ER and they would not be treated, and they would be sent home and told to come back when they couldn't breathe. And so here I am in the ICU, and we can't use hydroxychloroquine, and we got all these sick people in there, and we're figured out before too long that ventilating these people may not be the best idea. So then we started trying to use high flow oxygen, and that was working okay. The problem was that everybody was scared to death that it was going to aerosolize everything. And so then nobody wanted to do it, and nobody would give these people nebs when they couldn't breathe, like albuterol nebulizers and things like that, even though inhaled budesonide was a treatment for COVID, or one that we were thinking would work, and it was actually some published data that it did work. Respiratory therapy wouldn't do nebulizers because they were afraid they were going to aerosolize this stuff. And then one day I had been reading about these intubation boxes, and it's basically a clear plexiglass box that you can put over a patient's head, and it has armholes where you can get into it and intubate somebody without the respiratory droplets getting on you. And so I brought that in, bought it with my own money, and you would have thought that I cut the wrong leg off of a patient. I got called into the office. I got my hide chapped, and from multiple people, and they were beside themselves and could not believe that I had done such and brought a, quote, piece of medical equipment into the hospital without approval. And so that really just boggled my mind that basically a plexiglass box caused such an uproar. So anyway, I had to get rid of that. Well, we kept looking for treatments, and we came across ivermectin. And we started using ivermectin, and we were having good results. And we were using vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc and melatonin and Pepsid and Luvox. And I did a video on Luvox just yesterday or the day before yesterday. And around this time, I think was about the time the vaccine was getting ready to come out. We had been trying to do plasmapheresis. We did that in a few people, and it really figured out it didn't work real well, so that had stopped. And we'd been using this monoclonal antibody, and I can't remember what the name of it was, and it really didn't work. So basically, all we had was steroids, oxygen, and this remdesivir. And remdesivir was killing people. It was increasing hospital length of stay, causing kidney failure. Nobody would admit it. They kept pushing us to use it. And so one day, I'm at work, and I get a call from the pharmacist. Hey, no, I'm sorry. No, let me strike that. I was on vacation, and I get a call from a fellow physician and wanted to know how I had been ordering ivermectin for our patients. And I told him, and he said, no, I've been trying to order it, and it's not on the computer. I'm like, well, that's weird. It was on there 3 days ago when I left for vacation. He goes, well, I can't find it. So I get back from vacation and went back. Well, sure enough, it's not on the computer. And so I called to find out what's going on. Called down to the pharmacy, and they're like, Dr. Sanders, you can't use ivermectin anymore. I'm like, what do you mean I can't use it? Well, it's not FDA approved. I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, we took it off the formulary. I'm like, it's not on the computer. And he's like, yeah, we took it off the computer. You can't get it at all. So they took a drug off the computer, like out of the system, that we could not order at all. And so at that point, I was like, all right, there is absolutely 100% something nefarious going on. They are blocking drugs for no reason. Nobody could tell me why. Nobody had any evidence to support anything harmful. They just were not letting us treat patients. And so the treatment, I started arguing with the administration. I had multiple Zoom meetings because, of course, you can't meet in person, right? So we had to do Zoom meetings. They would not listen to a thing I said, despite presenting multiple articles on the benefits of ivermectin. Several of the articles were meta-analyses. They shut them all down, had their own agenda, would not let me talk, and just basically told me I was wrong and that I needed to be quiet and not mention the subject again, for fear of, I guess, some type of repercussion. I don't know if they're going to fire me or what, but I was basically silenced and told not to mention it again. And so during all this, we had patients that were on the ventilator and dying. And every hospital, as far as I know, across the nation had implemented these no visitation policies. And so you had these poor elderly people on the ventilator dying with no family, nobody could come visit, nothing. And after this went on for a little bit, meaning, weeks to months, we started asking, could we please have somebody's family come in when they're imminent? And they started letting us have a few people come in here and there, but they had to gown up, glove up, all this nonsense to come into a room with a patient who they had been at home with COVID prior to them being in the hospital, so they wouldn't catch COVID. So they'd already been at home with these people, but they didn't want them to catch COVID and didn't want them to spread COVID, despite the fact that they had no evidence of illness. So we started calling administration, asking, hey, can this guy's wife come in, whatever. And sometime we'd be granted, sometime we wouldn't. Well, one night we had this guy that was actively dying. Nobody'd been in to see him. And we called administration. Hey, we got a patient up here that's actively dying. We suspect they'll probably be dead within the next few hours. Can his wife please come in and be with him? And we were told yes. And then I called the wife back. I'm like, hey, we got permission. You can come up here. Well, what about my kids? And I said, well, let me check. So I called back, and this is no joke. This is the honest truth. This is what I was told. The wife can come, the kids can't. They can FaceTime him. The guy's unconscious on a ventilator, actively dying, and I was told that his children could FaceTime him. And that was the night that I guess everything hit, and I realized that we had lost all humanity. The medical system was corrupt. Everything that we had been doing was corrupt and evil, and just, it was, I don't even know how to describe it. I just had honestly never seen anything like it. And it was that night that I really realized that I have to get out of this mess, because what I was doing to these patients and being forced to do by hospital administrators who did not have a license to practice medicine, but yet they were dictating what I could and could not do, and that is illegal. And so that was kind of a turning point that night when I was told that this guy's children could not come see him. They had to FaceTime him when he was not able to FaceTime. But that was one of the cruelest things I think that I had seen throughout the whole COVID mess. But anyway, we kept trying to get people in, and, you know, there was some families that got in to see patients one way or another. And one day I was sitting at work again. I get a phone call from the pharmacist. Hey, Dr. Sanders. I'm like, hey, what's up? Yeah, you can't use vitamin D anymore. I'm like, what do you mean I can't use vitamin D? Like, you can't use vitamin D to treat COVID. I'm like, why not? You just can't. No explanation. I just can't write a vitamin. Well, not just vitamin D, but vitamin C and vitamin B and Pepsid and melatonin, Luvox. You can't use any of that. I'm sorry. I'm just a messenger. I didn't make the rule. So we went from being able, as a medical industry, for physicians to use whatever they wanted if they felt it would help a patient at any time, whether it was approved or not approved, long as we were doing it in good faith, thinking it would help a patient, to having hydroxychloroquine pulled, to having ivermectin pulled, to having vitamins pulled. Vitamins. Vitamin D, vitamin C, B vitamins. Couldn't use any of them to treat COVID, despite the large amount of evidence for vitamin D helping COVID. And so then this vaccine thing started, was, you know, ramping up. And there was so much evidence early on coming out about these vaccines from Dr. Robert Malone, who is one of the people that did invented the mRNA technology, and Dr. Peter McCullough, and Pierre Corey, and Dr. Merrick, and Ryan Cole, and all these doctors, and the critical care doctors, and these basic scientists, and pathologists, and critical care doctors, everybody. All this information was coming out about how bad these vaccines are and the potential side effects. And so we started telling people and talking about it in the ICU, and some of the nurses we talked to about it, and the patients, and they were asking, should we get the vaccine? And I'm like, no, I 100% wouldn't get it, because what are you protecting yourself from? The death rate of kids was unbelievably low, like less than 1%. And then as you go up in age groups, until you got to like age 70, your chances of dying from COVID were about 1% or less. And then it was only like 5% if you were over 70. So the elderly, like real elderly, and people that were obese and had hypertension were the ones that seemed to be so susceptible to having major problems with COVID. I mean, you were going to take a vaccine that was developed supposedly within months. Now, there's no possible way that this technology was developed and implemented and made into a vaccine and billions of doses made, and this rolled out by our federal government within, what was it, 9 months, 8 months, something like that. Anybody that knows the federal government knows they don't work that fast. They can't do anything. They can't even get somebody a paycheck on time, much less something like this. So this already had to be in the works. There's no possible way it couldn't have been. But so we're getting all this information early on about all these side effects for this vaccine that nobody knows anything about. And so we're telling people, yeah, I probably wouldn't get it right now. Well, all of a sudden, we're all getting into trouble for saying it. And I'm starting to get called up to the office. Hey, Dr. Sanders, are you telling people not to get the COVID vaccine? I'm like, yeah. Well, you can't say that. Well, why can't I say it? You just can't. Everybody has to get the vaccine. I'm like, well, I'm not getting the vaccine. Like, well, you can't go telling people that. I'm like, okay. So I went on back to work, whatever, and people asked me. I was giving them my honest opinion about it. I mean, I have a First Amendment right to tell my honest opinion about something, and people were able to go look this stuff up. It wasn't like I was just making stuff up. So a couple days later, I got called back to the office again. Dr. Sanders, didn't we just talk about this the other day? I'm like, what? You telling people not to take the vaccine? I'm like, nobody else has asked me. I haven't mentioned it to anybody in the last 2 days. Okay, well, I didn't think that was true. Well, I just got a call saying you were saying that something about it. I'm like, I have not told anybody since I've been in your office last, I have not talked about it. Okay, well, going back to work. So I go back to work. The next day, I get called back to the office again. Dr. Sanders, have you put anti-vaccine propaganda in the ICU? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? Well, I just got a call that you put an article and taped it across the desk in the ICU for everybody to read. I hadn't done that. So I found out who it was. It was one of the secretaries in the ICU. And so I went, after I saw it, I thought it was awesome, by the way. Wish I had thought of that. But anyway, I went and found her, and I'm like, look, you're going to get fired if you don't take that up. I'm not saying for you to take it up, but it's up to you if you want to get fired or if you want to leave this up. But I just got called to the office because they thought I did it, and they were pretty fired up about it. So she took it down. She was very upset about it. I was kind of upset about it too. I think what they were doing and limiting what people could say was basically limiting our constitutional rights. Again, in medicine, I've never seen anything like it, but this really shows how crooked the medical industry in America is. And the pharmaceutical industry was involved in all this because they were pushing remdesivir because they were making so much money. They were pushing these vaccines because they were going to make so much money. And if they said that ivermectin worked, or that hydroxychloroquine worked, or that using vitamin D worked, then that means there's a cure out there, or not necessarily a cure, but something that's helpful, and they wouldn't make as much money off these medications, like remdesivir and these vaccines and these monoclonal antibodies and all that. So they were pushing this narrative that these medications didn't work, and that's exactly what Anthony Fauci was doing. And he did the exact same thing back during the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s, early 90s, when he was not investigating these drugs that potentially could have worked against HIV, because he was trying to get a patent on ADT, or not ADT, AZT. And so this was the exact same thing that was going on a couple years ago with COVID, still going on. And we were basically treating people and just pushing them to an early death if they were in the ICU. If not, we were sending them home, not treating them. We were not allowing people's families to see them. One of the nursing homes I worked in, I went into a patient's room one day that had COVID, and the lady's husband was sitting outside of her window, outside in the courtyard, and they were talking very loudly so they could hear each other back and forth through the window. That is just beyond ridiculous, the stuff that went on. And here we are still wearing masks, and we're still gowning up. And, you know, the first wave of COVID went by, and there was no COVID for a little bit, and then the next wave of COVID hit, and it wasn't as bad. And then the next wave of COVID, and I don't know, we're in like the 4th or 5th wave now, I don't know, but it was really pitiful to see what happened in the hospitals and the nursing homes and all with this COVID mess, and what we were forced to do to keep our jobs, and what we were told we had to do as far as medical treatments go from people that had no medical license. And again, I mean, we lost constitutional rights. We were being told by non-physicians how to practice medicine. That's against the law. I mean, there were so many things that happened that were against the law, and they had just free run of anything they wanted to do. Nobody would do anything, and you couldn't say anything. Nobody would get in trouble. The vaccine companies knew about the side effects, and they had gotten it fixed where nobody can be held accountable if there's a vaccine injury. They just before they put it out, they talked to the government like, look, we will not be held accountable if something happens. They said fine, and it's fixed. If there's any vaccine injuries, nobody gets held accountable. And then the VAERS system, the Vaccine Adverse Reaction Reporting database through the CDC, people aren't reporting them, and the deaths and the injuries that are on there are probably 1/10 of what has really happened, because one, people don't report them. Two, I don't know if there's any doctrine of the website going on where they're actually keeping things from showing up that people are reporting. That's exactly what happened in Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else. If you had anything outside of the official narrative for COVID and the vaccines, you would be silenced. You would get suspended. You would get basically like yelled at by people, your colleagues, anybody. I actually had one friend of a guy in our neighborhood who was arguing with me about wearing masks and acting like I didn't know what I was talking about. He's not a doctor, but one of his friends got on there and asked where I worked, presumably because they were going to come either beat me up after work one day, or they were going to call the administration and try to get me fired. And none of my information like that is published, so they couldn't figure out where I worked, or if they did, I guess they never called, or if they did, nothing ever was done about it, or if they showed up to beat me up, maybe they showed up at the wrong time and couldn't find me or something, but I never got beat up for it. But they were really, really upset that I was saying that masks don't work. And I mean, this was not the only incident. It was the only incidence of something like that, but I mean, it was just argument after argument after argument with everybody about all this stuff, and nobody would look into it for themselves. They were just buying everything they were told from the media and from Anthony Fauci, who has a long history of lying and doing everything he can for his own personal gain, and making money off these drug companies and everything, as opposed to doing what's right for the American people. And so all that went on, and it was just really hard to go to work every day and know that I was going to have to watch people die, tell their family on the phone, not let anybody come see them. And then when the family's like, hey, did you give them ivermectin? I'm like, nope, the hospital won't let us. And so some of them would call and argue with the hospital, some wouldn't. There was some reports around the country of people getting court orders to get ivermectin to try, because the hospitals there wouldn't let them. But that just kept going on, and I finally just had enough. I could not do it anymore, so I left and went and opened up the practice I'm at now. And that was kind of the tail end of when COVID was bad. We never wore masks in the office. We never forced people to sit in their car. We wanted everybody to come into the office, because that's how you treat people in an office. You don't treat people in a car. We're not EMTs out in a car wreck trying to get people to emergency care. We treated people with ivermectin best we could. The problem with that was, so CVS, I believe, was under a lawsuit. I haven't heard anything else about it, because they were practicing medicine without a license as a whole pharmacy business, the brand name CVS, because they were not giving ivermectin to people. when a doctor would prescribe it. And that's practicing medicine without a license. If a doctor writes a prescription, you really, have to fill it unless there's good reason not to. And there was no good reason in this case. So they were under lawsuit. But many pharmacies, if you wrote ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine for a COVID patient, they were calling the medical board on you and trying to make you lose your license because they felt that it was that wrong to write a drug off-label to try and help somebody get over COVID. Yep, that's right. And so we would have to call around and say, hey, I've got a patient. If I write an ivermectin prescription, will you fill it or will you call the medical board on me? And it has gotten better and better, and now many places are filling ivermectin because finally people are starting to realize that it is good and it actually works. And all of this negative propaganda against ivermectin was crazy, and they were calling it so ivermectin was developed, I don't know, I think it was maybe in the 40s or 50s, I think, maybe have been later than that, but it has been given over 1 billion doses worldwide for river blindness and things like that in Africa, and parasitic infections. Very few side effects ever. There's hardly ever any adverse reactions. It's a very safe drug. Well, all of a sudden, it's a horse pill. And everybody's calling it a horse pill. And you can't take it because that's what horses take. And they were going on and on about it's a horse pill. And it's just, nobody knew what they were talking about. They were just repeating stupid lines and these phrases that they were hearing on the news and all. And so eventually everybody, that's what their response was. Are you taking that horse pill? I'm like, well, yeah, I am actually. And I had COVID and I took ivermectin. And I know many people that did. And then that one joker, that doctor that went in the Rolling Stone magazine and said that their hospital was so full of ivermectin overdoses that they couldn't get trauma patients into the ER. They were having to turn people away. Well, after that article came out, the next day, the hospital administrator had to retract that and say that actually wasn't true. They had not treated a single ivermectin overdose. But that's the kind of nonsense that was going on, was all these people were lying and making stuff up to fit their agendas and the narrative that was being told. And that's the same thing with a medical publication. So there were several articles out of the Lancet, JAMA, and New England Journal of Medicine that had to be retracted because people were publishing false and erroneous data and articles and coming to these fake conclusions about COVID to try to push a narrative. And it turned out that people called them out on it and they had to retract them out of the journal. Now that is potentially a career-ending thing to happen. If you publish something and it has to be retracted because you lied, that destroys your credibility and is a potentially career-ending event. But that happened multiple times because nobody would publish correct data. And another example, so all these publications on ivermectin that were showing that it didn't work. Well, you can design a study to have an endpoint of whatever you want. And these people were designing studies to show that ivermectin didn't work because, again, if ivermectin was shown to be beneficial, then you couldn't have these emergency use authorizations for all these other drugs like remdesivir and all these other things for COVID because there's other therapies out there. So there was financial gain to be had by fixing these studies and doing the, quote, peer review by your friends and people that were involved in the pharmaceutical industry to say, oh yeah, ivermectin's terrible, it doesn't work. I mean, come on. That is so dishonest. And that went on all the time. And anyway, so here we are now in 2023. Some hospitals are still requiring masks, some aren't. We've never worn them in the office. Nobody's gotten COVID, and there's not been spread of COVID through the office. The federal government has done away with the vaccine mandate after they have forced millions and millions of people, including our military personnel, to get these dangerous vaccines. They're still denying, and there's a paper that came out, and I'm probably going to do a video on it about the heart problems that have come about because of the vaccine, and they're trying to debunk that as not being real. But there's so many different side effects, cardiac side effects, blood clots. The pathologists are reporting all these crazy blood clots they've never seen before, all these cancers, all this stuff that has come about because of the vaccine, and they're trying to just bury all that data and act like it's never happened. But at least now they're not so much forcing people to get this vaccine, but they are trying to add it to the childhood vaccine schedule. I would never, ever, ever let a kid get this vaccine, or recommend for a kid to get this vaccine, because it is so harmful and has so many side effects and things that we don't even know of, what may happen years down the road. So that's kind of where we are with the vaccine. We talked about the medications. They're trying to add a new strain to the vaccine now. People are still getting boosters, and they're wanting people to get boosted, and sometime a couple, 3-4 times a year, and they're wanting to add this to the make it like a yearly flu vaccine. But that was kind of my experience as working in medicine, and there's probably some stuff that I left out that I just can't think of off the top of my head because I'm driving, and I'm just trying to tell it as I remember it. But all that stuff I'd said was true. I didn't make any of it up, and if you don't believe any of what I've said, that's fine. You can go independently look it up yourself. You can read about it and see what you think. If you still don't believe it, I can't do nothing about that. I'm just telling you my experience and many others' experience that have been very similar, and just wanted everybody to know kind of what went on from an insider's perspective and what all was happening that a lot of people probably didn't know about. But anyway, if I come up with other stuff, I'll do a video on it. I know there's some other things that I want to talk about with COVID, and I'll get to those, and we'll do those later on. But this is a longer video, so it'll probably be on YouTube with just a clip on TikTok and Facebook, and then you can go to the YouTube channel just to check it out. But anyway, I hope y'all have a good night, and I will see y'all later on this week with some other videos. I don't know what I'm talking about yet, but we'll come up with something. But y'all have a good night, and I will see y'all next time on Western Healthcare Exposed.